Good morning, everyone. It's just me this morning. Cathy's away on holiday, so you're getting Sunday morning with Jaime. And today, given the article I released on Wednesday on the outside and the response to it, I want to talk about writing. So no handwriting, no spelling, no grammar worksheets. Writing, proper writing. One of the questions I hear from parents more than almost any other is this: when will my child finally start writing? It's an understandable question. Eventually, every parent wants to see that first paragraph, the first story, the first essay that hangs together. Teachers ask the same question. Therapists ask the same question. I see the question in the Facebook group. And I think, respectfully, it may be the wrong question. Because parents are asking anything unreasonable, no. But because the question quietly assumes that writing suddenly appears, as though one day a child simply crosses an invisible line from no writing to writing. I don't think that's how it works. It's not for me. In fact, I think writing begins years before most of us recognize it. And by the time we finish today's conversation, I hope you'll see why I've come to this rather strange conclusion. A paragraph is not just several original sentences placed one next to each other. And a paragraph is not stage 6, sustained across sentences. Now, that does sound terribly technical, so let's unpack it. When we think about speech, we often forget just how much work the situation itself is doing. If I tell you a story whilst sitting across from you at a table, I don't only have words. I have my face. I have my hands, my voice. I can slow down. I can lean forward. I can point. You can interrupt me. You can ask me what I meant. You can say, wait, go back. You and I are sharing the situation. The conversation is happening inside a relational field that both of us occupy together. Writing loses all of that. Right? The page can hear my emphasis. It can see what I'm pointing toward. It doesn't know what happened 5 minutes earlier. It can interrupt me when I've skipped 3 steps because they seem obvious inside my own head. Everything the situation was carrying, language now has to carry instead. That is an extraordinary demand, especially for a Gestalt processor. So let's go all the way back. Stage 0, the script garden. Now, most people, when I call this writing, there's no pencil, no keyboard, no letters, but there is something much, much more important there, and that's meaning. Before anybody can write about an experience, the experienced has to become something that can be returned to. It must become coherent enough to survive. So think about what reading the same bedtime story every evening. From the outside, adults may think, oh, they're learning vocabulary, perhaps. But something much larger is happening. The sound of the parent's voice, the warmth of sitting together, turning the pages, knowing what's coming next, the rhythm of the story, the anticipation, the safety. That's one event, one lived whole. Before language becomes portable, life has to become retainable, right? That is stage 0. Writing begins there. Because writing is always carrying something. Before we ask how it's being carried, we need something worth carrying. Stage 1, then, is where that whole begins to travel. Perhaps the child writes the title of a favourite television programme. Perhaps she copies the same sentence again and again. Adults often look at this and think, oh, she's just copying. Maybe, but maybe not. That title might contain an entire world, not just words. Comfort, predictability, favourite characters, familiar emotional rhythm, an interval of safety. Writing is not merely reproducing letters, it is preserving an experience. Something important has happened. The whole has become portable, and the meaningful experience can now remain present after the voice stops. Then, stage 2 is where that whole begins to loosen. This is where sentence frames begin to make sense. fill-in-the-blank exercises, changing one word, keeping the rest, combining the beginning of a familiar sentence with the ending of another. Sometimes educators dismiss these activities because they're not considered real writing. I think they're enormously important. They're teaching something deeper. They're teaching that language can change without falling apart. The learner, she discovers that one piece can move and the whole can still survive. That is a profound discovery for a Gestalt processor. The writing may still depend heavily upon the structure supplied by the frame, but the learner is beginning to move within that structure. The scaffold is carrying much of the architecture, but the learner is beginning to discover which positions can change. Then comes stage 3. Stage 3 is, as you've been reading on both Substacks, it's one that I recognize very deeply, very personally. This is when words themselves begin traveling independently. The learner can increasingly select individual words because those words belong to the present situation, not simply because they occupy a fixed position inside a memorized phrase. As an autistic adult, I had a very small repertoire of words. I had favourite quotations. I had loose paragraph ideas from books that were read to me, passages that I loved, my grandmother's voice, different lecturers, different friends. I can often find someone else's sentence that came astonishingly close to what I wanted to say. What I could not reliably do was organise my own. And looking back, I definitely think I lacked ideas. I lacked architecture. I had building materials, not yet a building, right? Having words is not the same thing as having the relationship that makes those words belong together. A learner may be able to label a picture, make a list, or select exactly the right word without being able to organise those words into a sentence, much less a paragraph. Building material, that's not architecture. Right? That sets the stage for what comes next. And what comes next is stage 4. This is where something remarkable happens. An original sentence appears, not copied, not retrieved, not merely altered from a familiar frame. Original, proper original sentence. The writer gathers independently available words into a structure that did not previously exist. That is a huge, massive developmental achievement. But here is where I think education sometimes gets confused. 3 original sentences are not necessarily a paragraph. 5 original sentences are not necessarily a paragraph, because every sentence might be still standing alone. They might belong together inside the writer's mind, but the pages in here reveal how. Teachers often describe this as a list of sentences, or they say the student cannot stay on topic. Perhaps, sometimes. But I wonder how often the whole is already there. A writer may understand the relationship among all these ideas with painful clarity. She may feel them as one coherent structure, but the problem is that the reader receives them one sentence at a time. The writer does not yet possess the grammatical architecture needed to distribute that whole across several sentences so another person can recover it. That is a very different problem from having nothing to say. So we spend some time here, and then stage 5 changes the scale of writing. Grammar suddenly becomes much more interesting. And not because grammar is primarily about correctness. Grammar is about relationships. Time, cause, contrast, possibility, perspective, consequence. The paragraph is not merely a collection of facts. It's a network of relationships. One sentence explains another, one qualifies another, one introduces evidence. Another changes what the first sentence meant. Teachers call these topic sentences supporting details, transitions, conclusions, main ideas. But those are not simply boxes to fill. They are the names of relationships. A topic sentence establishes the organizing idea. A supporting detail elaborates, demonstrates, or sustains it. A transition tells the reader whether the next sentence adds, contrasts, explains, qualifies, or follows from what came before. A conclusion gathers what has changed because those sentences were held together. This is why a student can place a transition word at the beginning of every sentence and still produce a paragraph that does not make sense. The transition word is visible, the relationship is not. A graphic organizer can produce the shape of a paragraph. The sentence frame can produce the appearance of cohesion, but the presence of these structures do not necessarily mean the learner can independently sustain the relationships they are temporarily carrying. That does not make the scaffold false. That means the scaffold is doing real work, which finally brings us to stage 6. This is the stage where I think sustained composition becomes possible. Notice what a writer must do. She is writing one sentence, but she is simultaneously aware of the paragraph. She is aware of the larger argument. She's imagining a reader who is not present. She's deciding what the reader already knows. She's deciding what needs explaining. She's deciding which detail belongs, which detail, however interesting, must be left out. She is preserving the original claim whilst introducing evidence, contrast, qualification, and consequence. She may revise an earlier sentence because something she wrote later changed its meaning. That is astonishingly complicated. The writer is travelling through an entirely conceptual whole, one sentence at a time, without losing the whole. That's why I say a paragraph is not simply stage 4 repeated, it's stage 6 sustained across sentences. The complexity doesn't necessarily appear in the length of the sentence. A paragraph can be brief. Sentences can be simple. The complexity lies in the fact that the whole survives being divided. Each sentence performs its own work, but the sentences remain part of one larger movement. A writer can enter the whole, move around inside it, examine one part, return to another, revise something, qualify something, and still preserve the architecture that makes everything belong. For a Gestalt processor, that may be particularly important, though thought can arrive with a more internal relationship than language can initially expose. The whole may already be present. It's there. It's not vague. It's not empty. It's not waiting to be created. It's present. But it's inaccessible piece by piece. The earlier stages create viable points of entry. Stage 6 allows the writer to travel within the whole and name its dimensions without reducing it to disconnected statements. Analysis no longer requires severance. The whole can survive being opened. And this changes the question parents ask. Instead of, when will my child finally write properly, we should ask, what can writing hold today? Today, perhaps writing can preserve participation in a shared event. Perhaps it can preserve a familiar whole. Later, perhaps it can carry a fragment, then a word, then an original sentence, then several relationships, then arguments. Writing is not waiting to begin. It's already happening. The architecture is simply becoming capable of carrying more. And this also changes how we think about support. A sentence frame may uphold a structure the learner cannot yet generate independently. A graphic organizer may make relationships spatially available whilst internal coordination is still developing. Dictation may separate the work of composition from the work of handwriting or motor production. Mentor text may provide larger written gestalts that gradually become inhabitable. Blogging did this for me. Occupational therapy. Reading, paraphrasing, responding, and packaging language allowed me to accumulate larger forms that I could later draw upon in my own work. Those supports mattered. But the support should never be confused with the capacity it is temporarily carrying. Nor should the learner's need for support be treated as evidence that she's no longer thought of her own. The question is, it's always architectural. What is the scaffold carrying? What can the learner presently carry without it? What becomes possible when the scaffold changes? As a teacher, I'm honestly less interested in whether a student's page resembles the model than I am what the page is successfully preserving, because appearances can be deceptive. I've seen pages that look wonderfully organised yet contain almost no thought. I've seen pages that appeared chaotic yet concealed an extraordinarily coherent mind for which no traversable route had yet been built. As an autistic Gestalt processor, that feels deeply familiar. The whole arrives first. The problem was never having the whole. The problem was allowing another person to enter it. That is writing. No handwriting, no spelling, no the correct placement of transition words. Writing is the transfer of coherence from an apprehended whole into the structure of another mind. And they can enter without having shared the original experience. And perhaps that's why I find the idea so helpful. A child can write a paragraph is not standing at the beginning of the journey. She's already in it. The situation gave her something to mean. The Gestalt carried it. The fragment allowed movement. The word survived separation. Structure held an original thought. Grammar taught several thoughts how to belong. And eventually the page became capable of holding the whole. So I hope sincerely this does not resolve the issue. I hope it sparks dialogue. I hope that you can engage with groups, with classes, with your own children, your own students, and you can use this explanation, you can use the article, you can use chapter 5 of holistic language instruction if you like. But writing in any real sense is not speaking with your hand. Writing works totally different. And I think we need to remember that the amount of architecture necessary for writing to do well is not natural. It's not inherent in humanity. It is something that we must learn. And like everything, we have to be in the right soil to grow correctly. And I think a lot of pressure is put on, by this age we must do this, and by this age we must do that, and so on. What I like to do is take the pressure off. Show me what you can do. Show me what's possible today. And a lot of this requires safety. I know I've talked about that a lot and wrote about that safety aspect a lot, but we have to be okay as teachers, as mentors, as parents with failure, right? Yeah, you didn't get it right. That's fine. We'll work on it. You're safe here. You can explore, you can create, and we'll try again another day. It's fine, right? And so we have to have that grace. And I know since I started writing in 2006, which seems kind of funny to say because I was 36 then, I've grown a lot. And I can look back in the archive and I can see the development. I can see what my mentor texts were, who was my inspiration, who was my actual writing mentor. I can see that influence, and I get teared up a little bit about how much I've grown. And I've written, from stage 3 to stage 4. It's something that I remember because I lived it as an adult. I know the struggle. I know so many parents who are not themselves Gestalt processors, who have GLP kids. They don't quite understand what's happening. And so I've tried to be very descriptive. I've tried to, use the two substacks to complement each other, to the outside to explain kind of the architecture from the outside, and essential residue to kind of take a step inside, and this is how it feels, right? And so I know those pieces are kind of heavy, but being illiterate is no fun. And it comes with a lot of challenges and consequences. And so I offer these things up so that people, they can see, at least from my perspective, what's happening, and maybe they can apply it in their clinic or in their house. And I sincerely thank everyone who subscribes and follows and reads the shared stuff for their amazing support. It means the world to me. So with that, I will wish Cathy happy holiday, and we'll be back together. I would imagine next week, if not the week after. Depends on how fabulous the holiday is. But yes, with that, have a good day. Bye-bye.